Britain in the 70s had some great number one singles. Songs that summed up a moment, stretched the boundaries of what pop could be, yet have stood the test of time. Get It On, Dancing Queen, I Feel Love, Hit Me With Your Rhythm Stick, Heart of Glass. From this list you would think the British record-buying public had excellent, undeniable taste. But then there are other songs where you wonder, how did that become the most popular song in the country? Whether that's because it's a daring mishmash of genres, a random novelty, or just offensively not very good. This is an exploration of those songs. The stories of the most bizarre UK number ones of the 1970s. Glasgow's middle of the road had a roundabout way to the top of the pops. Singer Sarah Carr grew up in difficult circumstances. A coal miner's daughter with a bedridden mother, she and her 5 brothers passed the time by singing around the family piano. In 1967, Carr joined a group called Part 3, which changed its name to Part 4, then Las Caracas. The next year, the group won a few rounds of ITV talent show Opportunity Knocks. This success led to an offer to tour South America, embarking from Italy. But being a Scottish band with a Latin American name seemed disrespectful, so before they set off, they changed it again to Middle of the Road. But once in Italy, the South America part never materialized, and they spent the next few years learning Italian, scoring spaghetti westerns, and backing actress Sophia Loren on her early 70s singles. It was then that chance smiled upon them. This bloke from Liverpool, Lally Stott, gave us a song when we were just about starving in Italy. The 3 lads just couldn't see it as a potential hit, but I argued the toss with them. I thought it was very catchy. That's the thing, you see. I don't know anything about music, but they do. I like it because I thought it was commercial. You can say my ignorance paid off. Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep had already been a top 20 hit for Stott in Italy, but had failed to chart in the UK. The band were repulsed by the bubble-gumminess of the song, but after Carr stood her ground, they agreed to record it drunk on bourbon to make the shame easier to take. An earwormy nonsense call and response. Both sections are the chorus, with its lyrics implying the parental neglect of the little baby Don, who may or may not be a bird. Where's your mama gone? Where's your mama gone? Little baby Don. The fact that the song is so skin-peelingly positive, its structure so circular, and Carr's vocals so warbled, adds further unease to the track. To double his chances, Stott also lent out his song to Trinidadian brother and sister, Mac and Katie Kissoon. Their version would be a hit in the US and Canada, but Radio 1 DJ Tony Blackburn making the Middle of the Road variant a record of the week on his breakfast show, as well as it being a fixture at European holiday resorts, got theirs to number 1 in the UK, where it stayed for 5 weeks over the summer of 1971. It ended up selling 10 million copies worldwide, and supposedly gave ABBA a template to build off. To excel on radio or the stage, Benny Hill was arguably Britain's first comedian made by television. His variety show started in 1955, filled with his trademark cheeky innuendos, send-ups, and character work. By the early 70s, his bawdy, seaside postcard humour was attracting 21 million viewers per episode. Perhaps his most enduring musical contribution to British culture is his use of Boots Randolph's Yakety Sax as his latter-day theme tune. His hyperactive Blair, soundtracking scantily clad women, chasing Hill in comically sped-up footage. But he also personally composed many comedy songs for his show. Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West, was inspired by his brief teenage stint delivering milk in a horse-drawn cart back in the 40s. From this he pulled the idea of the amorous Ernie, trying to win the affections of the widow Sue from number 22. At the same time forming a more than competent parody of tragic Western story ballads. Nudges and Winks, his most ingenious piece of wordplay deals with Sue's desire to bathe in milk. He performed on his show in 1970. Hill dusted off the song for the Christmas #1 race in December 1971. And because of Hill's overwhelming popularity, it remained at #1 for 4 weeks, stopping glam rock colossus T-Rex from getting their third consecutive chart topper with Jeepster. Oh, girl, I'm just a Jeepster for your love. Comedy, like milk, has a shelf life. But in current year, it seems bizarrely quaint that this lightly horny novelty song got to the top. Hill wasn't the only comedian to score big in the charts in the 70s. In November 1975, Scottish funny man Billy Connolly earned a week at the top spot with his cover of Sheb Wooley's spelling-based Shaggy Dog parody of Tammy Wynette's Divorce. I am gonna get a DIVORCE. If you're bringing a family member along on your campaign for pop dominance, it's normally a sibling, or several. The Jacksons, the Osmonds, the Nolans. Lieutenant Pigeon's Robert Woodward made the left field decision to bring his 58-year-old mother, Hilda, along for the ride. Her somewhat deranged, detuned honky-tonk piano crashing being one of the more memorable qualities of the clumping, stumping, mouldy old dough from October 1972. The track is pop at its most primal, most elemental, recalling a drunken pub sing-along via musical tradition, its only lyrics being the song's title, hoarsely croaked by drummer Nigel Fletcher. When the pounding piano and beat gets too much, a militaristic penny whistle flourish enters to keep attention. Recorded in Hilda's living room using the family piano, it has a lo-fi homemade quality, an experiment in form, cocksure and propulsive like Glam, but with none of the guitars or glamour. First released in February 1972, it vanished without a trace, only for it to be embedded as the theme for a Belgian current events programme, shooting it to the top of their national chart, and refreshing interest in the UK, at which point series recurring character and Radio 1 DJ Noel Edmonds pushed the track to #1, where it remained for 4 weeks, ending up the second highest selling UK single of 1972. Both Norman Cook, aka Fatboy Slim, and Pulp's Jarvis Cocker have admitted to an affection for this one-off oddity.
I mean, I guess it's a novelty record, but it's one of those records that, for some reason, I find quite moving. There's something about it, even though it is silly. There's something quite touching about it.
We got to do our alma mater. We must do our alma mater. And our alma mater...
Few people can claim to have shaped rock and roll more than Chuck Berry. From 1955's Maybelline onwards, Berry affixed country and western licks to an R&B foundation. Maybelline, why can't you be true? Oh, Maybelline. And brought electric guitar into the frame as a fireworking lead instrument. Buddy Holly, the Beach Boys, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones all got their start aping Berry's work. He is important, no doubt, but he's also done some morally dubious things, not helped by how much his oeuvre consists of him salivating over teenage girls.
All the cats wanna dance with sweet little 16.
But the only time he got to number one in the UK and the US was with a novelty song about his dick.
That bell would ring, catch me playing with my ding-a-ling-a-ling.
In February 1972, Chuck Berry played the Locarno Ballroom in Coventry, mid-bill at the Lanchester Arts Festival, showing up late with only a guitar in hand, the promoters having to assemble a backing band for him. He overran by 15 minutes, yet still had time for an 11-minute version of My Ding-a-ling. This included a preamble where he taught the song to the crowd so they could heartily sing along.
The girls say, my, and the boys say, ding-a-ling.
To extend the metaphor further, is a very long dick joke.
Yo, ding-a-ling, we saw you playing with yo.
Unlike with Johnny B. Good, where he's playing the guitar like he's ringing a bell, here he wants you to play with his bell. And it's not even his original. Fats Domino collaborator Dave Bartholomew released a version in 1952.
She will not play with my ding-a-ling, my ding-a-ling.
This live version of My Ding-a-ling was then cut down to a less painful 4.5 minutes and released as a single in July 1972. Immediately it was greeted with uproar and outcry, partly because it's a really bad song, and partly because moral right crusader Mary Whitehouse was unimpressed with the slightness of its central metaphor. She feared that it might provoke the nation's youth to repeat the actions noted in the song. Some radio stations stopped playing it, but controversy breeds curiosity, and My Ding-a-ling stood firm at the top spot for 4 weeks.
Wanna play, everybody, with my ding-a-ling.
1972 was the year that Osmond Mania hit the UK. The brother band were the ideal continuation of the early Beatles and Monkees tween pop for the 70s. With their Mormon beliefs, they were so clean-cut and squeaky clean that they completely disregarded the sex and drugs part of the rock and roll trinity. They didn't even drink Coca-Cola. There was very little chance they'd make a drug film or an 8-minute abstract collage. And so when second youngest brother, Donnie, got a number one and stayed there for 5 weeks with the swoony, sappy Puppy Love, the little girls of Britain had clearly chosen their new pop boy crush. When the brothers embarked on their first UK tour at the end of November 1972, they were mobbed at every opportunity, the chastely lustful screaming never ending. At the same time, Donnie had a new single, The Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head-esque sweetness of Why.
I love you, and you love me all the time.
Also, the Osmonds had just released the surprisingly hard-rocking Crazy Horses. As Christmas rolled around, Why and Crazy Horses was still in the top 10, but another Osmond single had climbed to the top of the chart tree. The youngest Osmond, Little Jimmy, with the chipmunked musical strums of My Long-Haired Lover from Liverpool.
I'll be your long-haired lover from Liverpool.
Little Jimmy was 9 years and 8 months old when he hit UK number one, still the youngest to ever do it.
I'll serenade you till I'm old and grey. I'll be your long-haired lover.
The track was not an Osmond original, penned by Christopher Kingsley 4 years prior, but neither were from Liverpool. The titular lover's hometown and long hair is an allusion to the Fab Four and their original mop-top do's.
I'll be your long-haired lover from Liverpool.
So it's kinda like asking if you want your own personal Beetle. Why Jimmy claims he'll be her leprechaun and sit upon an old toadstool, we may never know.
I'll be your leprechaun and sit upon an old toadstool.
Thankfully, the song is just over 2 minutes long, and while it remained at number one in the UK for 5 weeks, the youngest Osmond's career lasted only a little bit longer than that. I was the comic relief, and it couldn't last, because I was singing the sugar hits. They marketed Little Jimmy Osmond dolls, and I had a lot of them. I liked to line them up and shoot them down. My weakness was eating too much food. I was in Vegas and I was sick on someone in the front row. One of my brothers picked me up and I kept on going. As well as radio, television was the dominant force in getting music to the listener. Not only because of the BBC's weekly chart countdown, Top of the Pops, but TV shows themselves were now spawning hits. Van der Valk was an ITV crime drama series set in Amsterdam and based on the novel series by Michael Freeling. It was dark, gritty, sexy violence in a scenic setting. A piece of library music was chosen for its theme, written by Dutch composer Jan Stockhart. Simon Park then arranged and conducted the piece, Eye Level, a light-hearted and spirited theme that the British public fell for. The first season of Van der Valk aired in the autumn of 1972, and the theme spent 2 weeks just outside the top 40. Season 2 in 1973 was the real winner, Eye Level sailing to number 1 in September, and ended up selling 1 million copies. So on Top of the Pops for 4 weeks, there was the unlikely sight of an orchestra rubbing shoulders with Slade, Sweet, and David Cassidy. Not only was it the first time a TV theme had topped the charts, it was the last time an instrumental would reach number 1 until the 90s, at which point wordless dance tracks didn't seem too odd. But yeah, the British public in the 70s sure loved detective shows. Actors trying their luck as pop stars isn't unheard of. In the 70s, as well as the comedians I've already mentioned, Lee Marvin, David Soul and John Travolta all momentarily found themselves at UK number 1.
Born under a wandering star.
Don't give up on us, baby. We're still worth one. The summer.
But Telly Savalas may be the most bizarre actor turned singer. While Savalas had appeared in films like On Her Majesty's Secret Service and The Dirty Dozen, his star turn had come with TV's Kojak, where he played the titular, lollipop-sucking detective.
You got the hooks for that, pussycat?
Who loves you, baby?
Okay.
The show began in 1973, but the UK didn't get a chance to see it until August 74, when it started being shown on the BBC. Unsurprisingly, this newfound fame boosted his profile in the UK, which in turn led to increased interest in his second album, 1974's Telly, a collection of mostly covers in his own unique style. And one of these covers, If, originally by Californian soft rockers Bread, managed to top the UK charts. Somehow.
If a picture paints 1,000 words.
If a picture paints 1,000 words.
The thing is, Savalas is not a singer. He possesses a deep, bassy voice, akin to that of the Inner World trailer guy. But he's not singing, he's just speaking.
When, my love, for life is running dry.
I suppose the intent was for him to sound like Isaac Hayes and Barry White's silky, sexy spoken word parts, but for a full album.
If the world should stop revolving, spinning,
As he admitted in the album's liner notes, people know that singing is not my bag. But if I say, hey, this is how Telly feels about this or that song, I can't make mistakes. I can only make mistakes by pretending to be a great singer.
and one by one, the stars would all go out.
Some of the videos of him performing the track are just wild. For the Netherlands' top pop, he is in bed in a suit, surrounded by attentive, half-clothed women. And for a performance on German TV, he is shadowed by a giant woman's face, confused, awkward and glowing, awaiting a call of action that never comes. Hear Me Out, a near 6-minute multi-part epic, seemingly about a murder.
Just killed a man.
but possibly about Freddie Mercury coming to terms with his sexuality and how he could never tell his parents.
Gotta leave you all behind and face the truth.
It takes cues from progressive rock, show tune ballads, light opera, and heavy metal.
So you think you can stone me and spit my eye?
The title isn't in the lyrics. Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody was not an obvious radio single. By 1975, Queen had dipped their toes in the higher reaches of the UK charts. The previous year's Killer Queen had flounced its way to number 2.
Stimulus and precise. She's a killer queen, gunpowder gelatine.
The next album, A Night at the Opera, new manager John Reid had secured the band the funding from EMI to properly serve their expansive theatrical rock music. And while guitarist Brian May's The Prophet's song was an early suggestion for a lead single, the band had spent 3 weeks in the studio getting Mercury's Bohemian Rhapsody just right.
Will you do the fandango? Thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening me.
For the opera-inspired middle section, they had overdubbed Mercury, May, and drummer Roger Taylor's harmonies over and over again to create its near 200-part choir of Galileos and Magnificos.
Galileo, Galileo, Galileo Figaro.
Magnifico!
As complex as it was, Mercury kept most of it organized in his head, augmented by notes on post-its and on the back of phone books. When complete, there was hesitance to release it as a single from Reid and the label. Another Reid-managed artist and composer of grandiose pop, Elton John, felt it was ridiculous and just too long to be a hit. There were so many arguments about it. Somebody suggested cutting it down because the media reckons we have to have a 3-minute single, but we want to put across Queen as songs. There is no point in cutting it. If you want to cut down Bohemian Rhapsody, it just won't work. To prove its commercial potential, Mercury slipped a promo copy of the track to friend, TV presenter, and Capital Radio DJ Kenny Everett. Over the course of one weekend, he played the track 14 times, with listeners jamming the switchboard and flooding record stores with demands for this still unreleased song. Further promoting the track was its innovative music video, which was shown on Top of the Pops instead of the band having to waste a day away from tour to mime.
Mamma mia, let me go. Beelzebub has a devil put aside for me.
In the end, it remained at number 1 for 9 weeks, the longest stay at the top since Diana by Paul Anka from 1957.
Stay by me, Diana.
It is now an indisputable classic, and the most streamed song from the 70s. The last comedian on this list is J.J. Barrie. Back in the 50s, he still went by his birth name, Barrie Authors, and had been part of a quietly influential Canadian musical comedy double act, Authors and Swinson, who had become quite popular in the UK. By the 70s, Authors had moved into country songwriting, and was trying to get the attention of Glenn Campbell with his track Where's the Reason.
Every evening, every morning, sharp at 6 and sharp at 9.
Campbell wasn't interested, and Authors recorded it himself, under his newly adopted moniker, J.J. Barrie, and released it to Crickets. The Crickets weren't too interested either.
Thinking, where's the reason? Where's the rhyme?
His wife then suggested he cover the poignant ballad, No Charge, which had already been a US country chart number 1 in 1974, for Melba Montgomery.
For the time and the tears and the cost through the years.
The narrative of No Charge is sickly sweet, sappy to the extreme, but is especially grating coming from Barrie. A son confronts his mother with a list of completed chores, asking for payment.
For mowing the lawn, $5. For making my own bed this week, $1.
The mother responds with all the things she has done for him, with only love in return, ranging from birthing him,
For the 9 months I carried you, growing inside me, no charge.
to teaching him the ways of the world.
For advice and the knowledge and the cost of your college, no charge.
Montgomery sings the song from the mother's point of view.
The cost
J.J. Barrie doesn't sing, but narrates the tale in a condescending spoken word, maybe as the father, but still with a frustrating remove.
The cost of real love is no charge.
At the same time, a histrionic female backing vocal repeats back the tale. Obviously, it's a touching if idealized scenario, and through floods of tears it got the UK public buying, and it climbed to number 1 for a single week. But with his background, even if he's playing the song completely straight, some, including Capital Radio DJ Roger Scott, heard it as a joke, a parody of country's overwhelming sincerity.
What a little gem.
No charge.
For the trust and the knowledge and the cost of your college. That's great. All of it, the whole thing's like that. Dissect it and listen to each bit.
J.J. Barrie's No Charge also added another chart topper to the pile for veteran session drummer Clem Cattini, present on at least 42, as well as playing on some solid gold hits.
To touch the green, green grass of home.
Get it on, back again, get it on. Here I stand again, the loser.
He also appeared on Chirpy Chirpy Cheep Cheep, Ernie, Mouldy Old Dough, and from the 80s video, Renee and Renato's Save Your Love.
Save your love, my darling, save your love.
Most of the songs in this list are covers. This is at least a parody, or at least a cover of a parody. The Wurzels were from Somerset in the West Country of England. They'd been knocking about since the mid-60s as the backing band for Adge Cutler, a charismatic rural lyricist that had got the group within spitting distance of the UK top 40, with 1967's Drink Up Thy Cider.
Bring up the cider, bring up the cider.
Most of their songs were about cider, manure, or general farming miscellany, sung in an ooh-ah West Country twang. They dressed as farmers and called their style scrumpy and western.
Oh, we knock the mill turns over and roll them in the culvert.
Cutler died in a car crash in May 1974, on the way back from a gig. The band continued on with banjo player Pete Budd as frontman, but turned their attention to Wurzelized versions of popular songs. Folk artist Melanie had a US #1 with Brand New Key back in 1971, a song about roller skating that could be inferred to not be so innocent.
Well, I got a brand new pair of roller skates. You got a brand new key.
Irish comedian Brendan Grace did his own version, an Irish #1, where he swapped the skates for a combine harvester.
Well, I've got a brand new combine harvester and I'll give you the key.
The Wurzels heard this and changed the lyrics about a bit, and gave it a new scrumpy and western coat of paint.
Well, I got a brand new combine harvester, and I'll give you the key.
Whereas Melanie's song could be interpreted as a song about sex, from the laugh when delivering its first line, it's clear the Wurzels are looking for a roll in the hay.
I drove my tractor through your haystack last night.
The narrator's interest in his neighbour's vast tracts of land, merely a metaphor for what he really wants to get his hands on.
We'll have twins and triplets, I'm a man built for speed.
A joyous West Country knees up, it even has a Kojak reference.
I'll give you the key. Who loves you, baby?
I told you, detective shows were big in the 70s. The Combine Harvester hit the top in June 1976. Its 2-week dominance denying Wings' Silly Love Songs #1. On Top of the Pops, they not only brought their prop tractor, but they also brought the party.
Well, I got a brand new combine harvester, and I'll give you the key.
People used to supply us with barrels of cider free at gigs. We once took 5 gallons to Top of the Pops and dished it out to everyone in paper cups. They kept coming back for more, not realizing how strong it was. The Bay City Rollers and Demi Roussos had a drop. We got asked not to take it there anymore. Ending midway through 1976 feels weird, but the rest of the decade was surprisingly good for #1 singles in the UK. I suppose it's bizarre that the offshoots of punk started spawning #1s. That Tracks from Greece hogged the chart apex for almost a third of 1978. I could argue that Kate Bush striking the top spot with a ghostly, vocally acrobatic ballad, adapting a 19th century novel when she was just 19, is kinda bizarre. Especially the bizarre fact that she was the first solo female chart topper who'd written her own hit. It's also quite odd that the single-averse Pink Floyd closed the decade in pole position with the second part of a trilogy about generational abuse.
Hey, teacher, leave them kids alone.
But novelties in the conventional sense fell by the wayside, at least for UK #1s, ready to bounce back in the 80s. However, Bohemian Rhapsody aside, these songs aren't necessarily what we think of when we think of music in the 70s. It was a time of musical innovation, massive cultural shifts, movie soundtrack dominance, and larger-than-life rock stars. A decade of glam, bubblegum, progressive rock, punk, and disco. At its most bizarre, it was a decade that reveled in controversy, a winking innuendo, and a willingness to cover songs that might not have already been a hit in the UK. There's some recurring themes that play out in these songs. The continued dominance of radio DJs to push singles, the nation's obsessive interest in crime dramas, and the recurring use of a certain drummer. But more than anything, they all convinced the British public to buy, making them all, for a week or 9, the biggest song in the country. Thanks for watching. So what are the bizarre 70s chart toppers do you feel I missed? Comment down below. If you like this video, like, subscribe, and why don't you share it with a couple of people? It really does help. As always, I'd like to shout out this month's new top tier supporters over on Patreon. Lost Kitten, Adam Cooper, and Miguel Carino. And thanks to everyone else that supports me. And I'll see you next time for something a fair few of you have been waiting for.